Hello and welcome to And Still We Rise. I'm your host, Christine Seidel, and today we have a therapist with us, Sara Kassam. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I am just going to read a little bit about the work that Sara does, and then we're going to start our topic for today. So, let's talk about Sara. Sara is a therapist at Rise Therapy Center. She enjoys using an empathic and tailored therapeutic approach when working with clients, as she believes there is no one size fits all solution to care. Sara often uses cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and operates from a family systems theory and person centered approach when providing services. When working alongside children, Sara aims to use creative and playful approaches. Sara strives to meet you where you are in your healing journey. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and
Yeah, and be
share.
part
Yeah,
of the podcast. Yeah, yeah. And fun little side note, your last name is about to change. So
that's right. It is.
congratulations.
Thank you. It's going to
Yeah.
be a big process trying to get the name change thing started, but
Yeah, and probably odd to like start hearing it on a regular basis,
mhm.
as a woman, it's kind of like, oh wait, my name is different. So congratulations, and we can't wait to celebrate that
Thank you.
new journey for you. So well, today, talking about relationships, talking about therapeutic work, we're going to talk about healthy communication, which sounds kind of like just a everyday type of thing. But as therapists, we really realize how very little healthy communication actually goes on in relationships. So tell us a little bit of how would you define healthy communication and why is it a part of like any foundational relationship, whether it's family, romantic, um, friendship, work, whatever. What is healthy communication and why is it so important?
It's so hard to define, I feel like, but I think the main thing that I look for in communication in any of my relationships and also as a therapist is like, are you able to be open and are you able to be honest? And also being comfortable enough to be vulnerable too. So I think with communication, sometimes things can get misinterpreted if we don't have the part of us being open, us being willing to be vulnerable with someone else. And of course, that vulnerability and openness doesn't come if there's no underlying trust. So that's like the foundational portion of communication. There's got to be some level of trust so that you can build up to openness, vulnerability, and honesty.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, I mean, communication is our means to some external end, right? Like
Mhm.
communication starts if it's like we need to inform or we need to solve or we need to
Be
declare or
heard.
something. Yeah. Right. So communication, if we didn't need communication, we would just be, kind of even if it's nonverbal, we still be doing the same thing, right? And we see
Mhm.
a lot of unhealthy nonverbal communication that goes on in our body language too. So, you know, healthy communication is really needed because we ultimately we have some end goal with it, which would be why unhealthy communication is is so disruptive to our process, I'm sure.
Definitely. And I think it's difficult sometimes because it's not like sometimes we're not intentionally trying to communicate
Yeah.
in a way that's unhealthy. It's just the way that we've learned behavior. And then it also is important for us to take that signs of our social signaling. Like, what are we portraying? What are our nonverbal cues? What are our verbal cues? I think it's really difficult to tell sometimes too with the different relationships. Like in romantic relationships, I'm more likely to speak in a different way with my fiance than I do with like my client as opposed to like
Yeah.
my parents. So it's
Yeah.
very nuanced too in that sense.
It really is. And I think that, within all of those different relationships, they're really trying to seek, like I said earlier, some end goal. So when that's not happening, that's typically when people are like, huh, something might be off. And we work with people every day, and so many people come in and they're like, I'm literally the best communicator. Like when I do couples work, They'll be like, one of them will be like, I'm such a great communicator. I constantly talk about my feelings. And their other partner's like, absolutely not. So what are some common signs that communication in a relationship has become unhealthy, or they're in a pattern of unhealthy communication?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I look out for is like, are you able to validate? And is the person feeling validated after your conversation? And I think that's where things get a little bit tricky too, because we oftentimes when we hear the word validation, we automatically tie that in with agreement and approval.
Right,
And
right.
that's the part where if there's one thing that I want people to take away is that validation does not mean agreement. It just means that you're hearing the other person and being willing to validate the emotion that they're feeling. It's possible to validate that they're feeling upset, angry, hurt, but you don't have to validate the action of them yelling at you or screaming at you or insulting you. I
Yeah.
think that's the main thing that I look out for. Like, how do I feel after this conversation with this person? Do I feel validated? And what can I do differently in my conversations?
Yeah, and I oftentimes like I think what we end up seeing is like that end result, right? Like the end result of their pattern, so they're
Mhm.
coming in because they actually are staying in the same conversation over and over and over. That's a pattern of unhealthy communication where you actually can't get to any resolution, whether the person feels seen and heard, or whether there's an agreement that has been able to take place, or whether repair has been done. That's where we really see these patterns of unhealthy communications, when they're literally having the same conversation over and over again. And that's typically because validation hasn't occurred at any level. So tell us more about, what does validation mean in the context of healthy communication? We know it's needed, but what does validation really mean in a healthy communication, healthy relationship?
Yeah, I think the first part of validation is just for like the basics, like making eye contact with the person while they're talking to you, actively listening to them, nodding along while they're talking. And it doesn't have to be like a dramatic, like, oh yeah, it's just subtle, like body language, like eye contact, making sure we're listening to them, showing them that we're interested in what they're saying. And then
Mhm.
empathizing, I think. So, like, we've heard what they said, and then we repeat it back to them, like, hey, that makes sense to me as to why you would feel that way. I would also feel that way if I was in this situation. And then giving feedback, like, you must be feeling hurt. You must be feeling whatever. And then ask them, is that correct? Did I interpret that correctly? I think that's the way that I like to, bundle up my validation, like, start with understanding where they're coming from, listening to what they're having to say, and then seeing like, am I understanding you correctly? Like, it's okay to ask, like, is this correct? Because again, we're not trying to guess how they're feeling, but we're also not wanting to put words in their mouth either. So it's kind of
Mhm.
having to navigate that little balance there. And I think one thing that I've seen a lot also is whenever we have couples and they're disagreeing, they always, they want to portray their perspective by saying,
Right.
no, I'm sorry, but actually I see it this way. Now, see, that's not necessarily validation. Instead, I would say something like, I hear you and I see it this way, as opposed to saying, I'm sorry, but, because then the but just negates everything you just said.
Yeah, it's interesting in like communication how when somebody that we're in a relationship with, regardless of what the relationship type is, when they come to communicate us, it's like we're already if we're in an unhealthy pattern of communication, we're already trying to figure out how to fix
Yeah.
or confront whatever information they're coming at us with. So let's say a wife comes home and she's, just totally flustered because of traffic, and this person like cut her off and gave her the middle finger, and she's all flustered, and she comes home and the husband's like, well, maybe next time, don't do this, and already the communication has been cut off, because ultimately that's not a situation that needs anything to be fixed. It doesn't need anything to be overcome. It just needs to be expressed, right? And
Yeah.
we don't realize in so many ways how unavailable we become in communication when we've been in unhealthy patterns, that we're not even really hearing what it is that the person is actually expressing.
Mhm.
And so I think it's so important when we notice these patterns of and it's almost like a visceral feeling within the body. It's like we almost contract a little bit when
Yeah.
we
Like you get
go up.
defensive, like,
Mhm, mhm, and then
yeah.
all of a sudden, something that just needed to be validated in terms of like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody cut you off," and the middle finger. What is wrong with you?"
Right.
And then we're like, "Ah, yeah, that's right." And then if our partner continues, then we're kinda like, "Yeah, I mean, actually, it wasn't that bad." And we can
Yeah.
move through it so much more because we actually no longer have to hold on to that feeling
Right.
of the injustice of being cut off in traffic, right?
Yeah.
So, with validation, how do we actually really support ourselves in validation? Because I love that you said validation is not about agreeing with somebody, it's
Mhm.
about being present with somebody. So how does
Mhm.
that actually support us too?
Yeah, in a way, like by validating others, we're also making sure we're looking inwards, validating ourselves. So I think something that I see a lot with some of my high performing clients is like they feel like, they should already know how to do this. They should already be doing this. And then they are not able to have empathy for themselves because they're like, well, this is something that I should already have known myself. They're not able to validate the emotion that they're having, the feeling that, oh, like maybe like I'm feeling a little scared, I'm feeling a little nervous. So I think validation can apply inwards too. You can work on validating the emotions you have. You don't have to validate the fact that you did something that was hurtful to someone. You can validate that you were hurt, so maybe that's why you hurt them. I think that that's a that point that I see a lot too, like about the action. Like sometimes if someone makes a mistake, they really get hard on themselves or they want to like rectify that. And again, we don't have to validate the fact that you made the mistake, just validate the fact that you feel a certain way about it and it happened.
Mhm. Well, and I think that, what you're kind of speaking to is that, when we practice validation, we're actually coming to a place of acceptance too,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
two things can coexist.
Mhm.
You can have that experience and I cannot agree with it, right? But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that conflict has to occur. It
Mhm.
means you can have that experience and I can attend to it, and I can still hold my perspective and move through it. And it's
Yeah.
almost like you're coming to a point of acceptance of like, I choose the relationship over choosing the need to be right or the need to
Right.
fix. Like I'm choosing the relationship over
Mhm.
my sense of rightness, I guess, in whatever
Yeah.
way that.
And that's so difficult to do because, in that heat of the moment, you're like, I just want to convey my point. It doesn't matter how I convey it. It's like, I just want to convey it. And that's something that I always see well, I often see, not always see,
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
often see
pretty
with couple.
regularly though.
Yeah, right. Like often see with couples too. Like with the example you gave about the wife coming home, all she wanted was someone to validate that she was feeling that certain way
Yeah,
and not like jump into problem solving. And I think that's a great way for us to even build communication. Like when the wife shares, says, "Hey, what do you need from me right now? Do you want to just vent? Do you want me to give you feedback? Do you want me to help you problem solve? Like, tell me how I can support you." And I think
yeah.
that's a good conversation starter too to help get the communication flowing.
Yeah, and I think
Mhm.
that, like, that validation can even be from a playful state, right? Like that
Mhm.
example of the wife, coming home and the injustice of somebody flipping her off and,
Yeah.
getting stuck in traffic, and your partner being kind of your cheerleader. That's a form
Mhm.
of validating. It was like, how dare somebody cut off my sweet baby? Does they know she's got to get home and like we have like wine ready and like there's a
Yeah.
playful state in that too of being like, ah, I hate that for you too, and
Mhm.
it helps us move through things where we're able to, even as a person that's venting, is able to come back to presence and be like, oh my gosh, you're right. It was a middle finger. And that's about
Mhm.
somebody being completely unhinged right now. And
Right.
I don't need to carry that with me. So it also, when we feel validation in a conversation, it's not only that we come back to a place of like connection with somebody else, it's that we connect to ourselves and we're kind of like, wait a minute, me being upset about this is really not authentic to who I am. So I'm gonna like move through something that is really actually not something I to carry along with me.
Mhm.
So I think it really does end up kind of diffusing a lot of unhealthy communication dynamics that don't serve the relationship and don't serve us.
Right.
You know,
And
if
it's so
I,
important. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's so important for us to be attuned to that too, like especially with our partner, like knowing like what is it that, vibes well with them? Like, is this gonna help them right now? And is me jumping into the problem solving mode gonna fix how they're feeling? And I think the fixing part is a lot of things just get a little comfortable because you don't like seeing your partner in distress. You want to fix them. You don't like seeing your friend in distress, but
Mhm.
fixing it and jumping in to do that is not always the solution.
Yeah, and oftentimes that's a sign of like our own discomfort
Yeah.
that they're feeling that way. So that brings me to the next question, because this all sounds great and wonderful, but I know that both of us work with high conflict families. You know, we do something called reunification therapy at our work, where conflict it has been the basically the foundation of these relationships, right? So validation is something that we really need to be achieved in order to start working through to some type of healthier dynamic. But when we start talking to people about this, they really, because there's been so much conflict, they're like, I don't even know how to get, what do you mean validated? That's not what happened. So how can you actually practice validation without necessarily agreeing or endorsing somebody else's experience, somebody else's, experience, so to speak?
That's a really good question because I think something that I often revert back to is the and. So like I think sometimes when we put in the but saying like, okay, you feel that way, but I feel this way. So that's why my opinion is more valid than yours. I think adding in the and, like two, like you said, dialectics, two things that are opposing can still be true. You can still feel this way about my child, and I can still disagree with the fact that you feel this way. And realizing that that doesn't mean that there's conflict, that just means that you don't agree on the same thing. And it doesn't necessarily need to turn into a big prolonged fight. And again, it's easier said than done, right? But I
Yeah.
think the easiest way that I found it to be beneficial is just replacing the but to the and. And
Hmm.
even practicing validating ourselves, I think it starts within us, and then we can move our way out too. And just being radically genuine. Like we're not going to be, it's not a power struggle. It doesn't have to, you don't have to one up the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's key, is that, especially in any type of relationship, even within ourselves, we really do have two experiences. So within
Hmm.
ourselves, we have the conscious and the unconscious experience of something, right? And within a relationship, we have two or more experiences. And validation within, let's just say, there was a fight. And of course, healthy communication, if we go into a lot of the semantics of it, we start going into unhealthy dynamics when we start saying, you did this, right?
Hmm.
But even when we say, hey, I feel disrespected when this, that, or the other occurred, and the other person is like, yes, but all of a sudden we're
Hmm.
shut down, right? And so
Yeah.
we can, part of this is accepting that somebody can experience something and that is valid. Like their feeling around that experience is valid. And our intention could have never been to be disrespectful.
Hmm.
And we can validate that feeling. We can say, hey, I'm so sorry that when I said that, it came across disrespectful. And know that that was never my intention. I was really trying to communicate this, that, or the other. So all of a sudden now we have a feeling, that an experience that brought about a feeling
Hmm.
that's valid, and an expression of intention. And
Hmm.
oftentimes those two things they don't equate to each
Add together.
other.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want somebody's experience to match our intention, and that doesn't always happen. This isn't math, right? We have all these different dynamics, and the same thing happens within us, right? Consciously, I might experience something, and unconsciously, I have a story playing out, being like, I'm so stupid, blah blah blah, like never good enough. My conscious part has to say, hey, I know that that made you feel that way, and that has never been the truth, right? Like, so yes, that feeling comes from somewhere, and I hold space for a different narrative, you know. So that validation, if we get even too stuck in trying to fix within ourselves
Yeah.
or trying to defend within ourselves, we end up not getting a full processing of that experience or of that emotion. So,
Mhm.
so how would you support somebody who's really, really struggling to start the process of validation, especially, let's say, in a relationship where they do tend to find themselves in a little bit of higher defensiveness?
I think for that, like I just identifying like within yourself, hey, what emotion am I feeling right now? And what is its purpose? What is this emotion trying to tell me? So let's say, for example, I just came home from a long day of work. I come home, the dishes are not done, the house is a mess. I had asked my husband to do this one thing and he didn't do it. So in my head, what emotion am I already starting to feel? Irritation, anger. What is this irritation and anger telling me? It's telling me that I am uncomfortable by something that happened. It's telling me that something was misconveyed in my communication with my husband. That's when, once you've analyzed what emotion you're having, then I would really say, like, how can I confront this in a way that doesn't come across as if I'm attacking him? And that's when the I feel statements come in, right? I felt this emotion when I saw all of this. I don't want to assume that you didn't do it because you're trying to neglect me or because you're intentionally trying not to listen to what I have to say, but this is how I felt about it. And I want to convey to you that this is what was going on in my head. So coming
Mhm.
from that approach instead of immediately going into, well, you should have done this. You're not listening to me. You did this on purpose. You never listen to anything I have to say. And then it just spirals. So I think that would be like the easiest way to like not
Yeah.
immediately go into attack mode. But now I just realized you asked about defensiveness. So
I mean, actually, that was a really good recommendation. It's like, huh, yeah, maybe don't start from, oh, I see. Actually, it's funny because I actually came home the other day hangry. Like I was hangry. I had worked, there was soccer, all this stuff. And I saw that like the house was a mess, there was no dinner. And I was like, huh, I was already in that state. And, sometimes even as therapists, like people think we have, we've mastered all these skills, but we still have to be, and I think this is the key, coming to a conscious place as to what is
Mhm.
my emotion and how can I communicate this from a place of staying in connection with myself and with somebody else, and
Mhm.
understanding that that emotion doesn't mean that that was the intention of somebody.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, the first step to learning to validate is to become very conscious of your emotions from somebody else's communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. Dishes everywhere. That's a nonverbal communication of I'm not respected,
Mhm.
right? And then we come from that emotional place. So really that first step is about kind of consciously seeing what is the feeling I'm having and how do I need to address it. And using
Right.
those I statements is so important because it's not coming from a projected place, it's coming from a more embodied place.
Yeah. And that way you can distance yourself from the stories you're telling yourself about the emotion too. Like if I'm having this emotion, the story I'm telling myself is that my husband doesn't respect me. So
Mhm.
how can I come from this from a like how can I bring awareness and consciousness to this part so that I do not go into an attack?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the conversations we've kind of had is about being, how to respond when we have a reaction to something. But I think
Mm.
the more you become nuanced in validation, you also can come at it from a proactive standpoint, right? So in your
Mhm.
scenario of coming home and the house is a mess, kind of like I should have done last week, which I didn't,
Love
is
the accountability.
right, exactly, right? Like I need to hold myself accountable. Is seeing something, needing to address it because it did feel like disrespect, going to that person and saying, "Hey, it looks like you've had probably a really busy day, and you've had a lot of tasks to address. So I wanted to just make sure, was there a plan for the kitchen, or was there a plan for this, that, and the other, or do we need to find a different solution, right?
Mhm.
So, that also goes into a whole other slew of things like expectations versus agreements. And, I'm sure we'll have to have you back on for more healthy communication skills. But so validation, it's a tough thing for people to grapple with. And oftentimes they go into more invalidating statements. So can you give me an example of like, okay, we've talked about validation, how to practice it, how to say it, that it's not necessarily agreeing, but what does invalidating statements look like, and what are some of them?
Yeah, and I feel like invalidation is something that can occur based on your environment, and it can also occur without even like us intentionally wanting to invalidate. It can be things like, oh, like you should not be crying. That's not something to cry about. There's no need to be crying. That gives us the message that, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I should not be crying. Like, what's wrong with me that I am crying? Or a statement like, oh, I had a similar situation like that. Again, it's okay to empathize, but then when it becomes more of like, oh, I had a situation like that too when I experienced this, and this is, I completely know what you're going through, and then making it about them. So
Mhm.
the biggest one that I've seen, at least when working with high conflict families, is, the you shouldn't feel that way. I don't understand why you feel that way. You're too sensitive, or I've experienced this too, and I was just fine. So I don't know why you're not fine.
Yeah. And you know what again, that goes to that whole point of like their intention, they are probably thinking their intention is to help fix it, or like, let me
Yeah.
tell you how I did this, or let me, like, let me tell you this isn't something sad to be crying about. That's probably their intention. Unfortunately, that's actually about is them and their discomfort, and they're not wanting to feel dysregulated, or they want to be seen and heard in their experience, right? So those are all like such invalidating statements that probably come from a place of like, I want to fix this, I don't want them to feel this way, or I want them to know they're not alone. But it actually pulls back that space where we can really attune and attend to somebody that we care about. And something, a phrase that I hear a lot about, and I think people believe it comes from a genuine place or a validating place, but it's actually very invalidating, is I'm sorry you feel that way.
Oh, yes. Yes. That that
Because
just
does that really feel like an apology?
yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Mhm. And
Mhm.
invalidation, sometimes that needs to lead to a repair, right? But when we say, I'm sorry you feel that way, what we're really saying is, I'm sorry that's yours.
Yeah.
And I
It's just
can't be
I
in
have no part of it. Yeah, I have no
that.
part of that.
Yeah, and that's a very invalidating and very shutting down statement, but yet people will often feel like, well, look, I apologize that you were feeling that way, but it has no ownership. And that happens a lot, especially in parent-child relationships or in romantic relationships, where we're so uncomfortable that our partner is feeling a certain way, probably because of something that we've participated in, that
Mhm.
we know we need to have some accountability, but we can't hold full accountability. So we
Mhm.
say, I'm sorry that you feel that way.
Because then it goes back onto the other person, and we don't have to identify the emotions we're feeling and the uncomfort we're feeling because it just goes right back.
Yeah. So let's say somebody who's listening to this or watching this, they're seeing either themselves, which we tend to not see that unless they come to therapy, but
Yes.
themselves in a very unhealthy pattern of communication, or maybe a very unhealthy pattern of invalidating, or they are seeing that they are the receiver of a very unhealthy pattern of communication, or they're receiving, a lot of invalidating statements. Most likely, both parties are participating in it. But what would you say would be the next steps to really start harnessing the power of healthy communication?
Yeah. So are you saying like if they are the receiver of the invalidation?
Or vice versa, what would be the
Mhm.
first steps to take, if you're recognizing you're in a cycle of unhealthy communication with someone or people in
Yeah,
general?
definitely. I would definitely try my best to like address it in a way that's, again, so reflecting back, having the conscious awareness of what emotions are coming up for me and laying down what the facts are. Like here, the fact is that I have observed this person say this to me in this specific quote. I have observed this is the feeling that came up for me when they said this. And now I want to be able to talk to this person about it. Because, and again, it also depends on whether, like, how important this relationship is to you. If this is someone that is very important and close to you and you have a desire to repair the relationship, I would definitely encourage that person to, let's go up to this person, granted that it is a safe person and they're not in danger in any way by interacting with them, but just going up and saying, hey, I felt this emotion when I heard you say this to me. I want to clarify, what was your intention with this? And I mean, if there's something that I'm missing, what can I do to like improve our communication? That's just how I typically approach that. But I know it can be different with different like case by case basis.
Which I think is a great way to kind of encourage people if they're seeing a pattern to seek some external support, right? Whether it's through a
Hmm.
therapist or through a coach,
Yeah.
as the first step, like you said, is to become consciously aware of self, right? Really
Mhm.
take that focus off of the other person and come back to yourself. What am I experiencing? What am I participating in? Because we do see like a lot of unhealthy communication is what leads to the ending of relationships, which leads to, you know, distance in, family people and difficulties in getting projects completed at work and the breakup of relationships because we are not looking at ourselves, we're looking at somebody else.
100%. Right.
And so
And
that
when,
first step is having that space to be consciously aware. That's not super easy to do. So having a third party that can kind of reflect that to you tends to be the safest place because there really is there's no
bias.
harm in that, right? And yeah, and there's no
Yeah.
consequence to being able to sit in that space. Even in couples therapy, I typically sit with them individually for a little while so that they can get conscious in what they're actually saying and feeling, and then hearing that their feelings are valid and their experiences led to that, but that it's not their partner's responsibility to own that necessarily,
Hmm.
right? Because we're trying to
Yeah.
get some kind of discomfort fixed. So I
Hmm.
think, you saying becoming so much more conscious of yourself is that first step, and that's not always easy to do. So that would be the best time to go find Sara because she's a great place to be able to use as a mirror, to hear things for like what they actually are within yourself so that you can come to a more conscious place with a partner or a family member or a workplace. I always say, when you want to start practicing healthy communication, seek to understand, rather than coming to self and being like, this is what I want, seek to understand what's actually happening within
Right.
yourself and potentially within somebody else. So,
Yeah. And communication is just a form of connection seeking. Like that's
mm,
literally what it feels like because you're trying to get something heard, as you said in the very beginning of our podcast. Like, something is trying to be fixed or heard, and you're trying to find connection with the other person when you're
yeah.
communicating.
And communication is a non-negotiable to connection. And
Hmm.
healthy communication is the only path we can take to begin that process, right? Otherwise, we're going to stay disconnected. It's not safe because those very organic needs of being seen, heard, and loved can't be met if there's invalidation, right?
Right.
So,
Hmm.
well, anything else you'd like to kind of share with our listeners or our viewers? What else can you kind of add as little tidbits for healthy communication or validation or invalidation?
I think just giving ourselves grace throughout the process, like it's very difficult to, like listening to this podcast. Okay, now I know all about validation, so I'm going to apply it in my daily life. Like it's very difficult to actually implement what we learn. So giving ourselves grace, reminding ourselves that, hey, like it's okay if I'm not able to validate myself right away. It's okay if I'm not able to immediately become this healthy communication guru just because I, heard these skills one time. I think it's like a continuous process. And also maintaining our self-respect throughout the entire conversation. Sometimes if we're feeling invalidated, feeling attached, we may not even have enough confidence or self-respect to be able to share because we've been invalidated. And also like not feeling bad about wanting to change things in your communication. There's nothing wrong with wanting a difference or a change.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And as an inner child, rooted therapist, having that grace to understand that these communication patterns really were instilled a long time ago. Like we learned these patterns at a time that we were not fully conscious. And so have grace with yourself as you're trying to learn new ways of being authentic, being in connection, and knowing that communication is the root of being able to get that. And I love that you said, holding space for your own self-respect. A lot of times when we're part of unhealthy communication, that can lead to codependency, that can lead to people pleasing, and that you don't
Mhm.
just to stay in connection, which it's not really connection. We don't have to negate
Right.
our own levels of needs to be able to get that. So I love that that was also highlighted too, that this isn't about shaming yourself and changing everything about yourself. It's about understanding to understand yourself as well. So.
Right. And understanding what you value in a relationship. That would be like great self-inquiry there. Like, what are my values and what is being disrespected here when I'm being invalidated?
Which is a great segue too. When you can't have
Yeah.
when you can't have healthy communication in a relationship, how it's okay to set boundaries and make different decisions.
Mhm.
So I think that's a great
Yeah.
topic for another podcast. We have like series with Sara now. Oh, good. Series with Sara. I like it.
Ah,
Well, thank you so
oh my
much,
God.
Sara, for coming on. And I have to just tell you all, like Sara is such a bright light in our practice and is absolutely wonderful with family systems and such. So if you're looking to work on healthy communication or just understanding yourself more from a rooted place of your own patterns of communications or family systems, please feel free to reach out. Her link will be down in the bio where you can learn more about her and how you can contact us for further services. But thank you so much, Sara, for coming on.
Yeah.
And so excited for your next couple of months of celebration and change. We
Yeah.
can't wait to see all the fun things coming from your space. So,
Thank you so much for having me on, and definitely will be practicing my validation as I go into these wedding
oh,
festivities.
I bet we'll have plenty of people to be interacting with, I'm sure. So, all right. Thank you, listeners, for coming and joining us. If you're watching this, thank you for being a part of it. To support us, we ask that you please, please, please go down, give us a 5-star review, leave a comment, and we can continue to be providing this content for free. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.